The kiss was a mistake. The gun cocking behind her was not. Isabella felt the sound before she understood it. The sharp, metallic click slicing through the music, cutting deeper than the cold January air. Her lips were still pressed against his, warm and trembling when the world seemed to freeze. Fireworks erupted above the New Year party, showering the midnight sky in gold and crimson. But the celebration felt distant now, unreal, like a dream she was about to wake from screaming. She pulled back slowly. The man she had kissed didn't look surprised. He looked dangerous. His eyes were dark, unreadable, the kind that didn't beg or plead, they decided. A faint scar cut through one eyebrow, giving his face a permanent edge of menace. He stood tall and unshaken. Amid the chaos of the rooftop party, black suit immaculate, posture relaxed in a way that told her he feared nothing here. Isabella's breath hitched. Wrong man, her instincts screamed. Very wrong man. Behind her, she could feel the presence of the gun like a ghost pressed against her spine. She didn't dare turn around. The city lights glittered below, the countdown echoes still ringing in the air. 3, 2, 1, as strangers cheered, kissed, and toasted to new beginnings. One noticed the shift. No one noticed how danger had quietly wrapped its fingers around her throat. I'm sorry, Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the music. I thought you were someone else. The man's gaze flicked to her lips, then back to her eyes. Slowly, deliberately, his mouth curved, not into a smile but something far more unsettling. People usually regret kissing me, he said calmly, just not this quickly. A chill ran through her. She tried to step back, but the space between them didn't open. Instead, he moved closer, close enough that she could smell expensive cologne mixed with something darker. Gunpowder, perhaps, or blood. His presence was suffocating, commanding, as if the air itself bent around him. That was when the whisper reached her ears. Do you know who you just kissed? Her heart slammed against her ribs. The gun behind her lowered, but the threat remained. Isabella finally dared to turn her head. Men stood nearby, dressed sharply, eyes cold, hands hidden beneath jackets. They weren't party guests. They were guards, soldiers, killers. She looked back at him. Who are you? She asked, though fear already knew the answer. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her worth, her danger, her fate. Then he leaned down, his voice brushing her ear like a promise and a warning combined. Dominic Moretti. The name hit her harder than the gun ever could. She had heard it before. Everyone had. Spoken in hushed tones, attached to disappearances, power deals, and blood-soaked legends whispered across the city. Dominic Moretti wasn't just a man. He was the Mafia. Isabella's knees weakened. If his men hadn't subtly closed in around them, she might have fallen. I didn't know, she said, panic cracking her composure. I swear, I didn't. I know, Dominic interrupted. His tone wasn't cruel. That scared her more. That's the problem. Another firework exploded overhead, bathing his face in red light. For a brief second, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Interest, perhaps. Or possession. Around them the party roared on, blind and careless. Champagne flowed. Laughter echoed. Time moved forward for everyone else. But Isabella stood frozen, caught in the gravity of a man who ruled the dark. She had come to the New Year party hoping to forget her worries, to feel normal, to start over. Instead, at the very first second of the new year, fate had marked her. Because Dominic Moretti didn't let mistakes walk away. And the kiss? That was only the beginning. She pulled back, breath shaking. The man's eyes darkened. Not with surprise, but ownership. Isabella felt it instantly. The shift in the air, heavy and suffocating. Like the moment before a storm breaks. His gaze lingered on her as if she were something he had already claimed. Something that now belonged to him simply because he had decided it did. There was no question in his eyes, no confusion, only certainty. Around them, the music continued to pulse, but the circle of space felt smaller, tighter. Conversations faltered. Laughter dulled. People were watching now, even if they didn't know. Why? Danger had a way of announcing itself without words. Whispers began to slither through the crowd like poison. "Do you know who you just kissed?" someone murmured, voice sharp with fear rather than curiosity. Isabella swallowed hard. Her heart raced as she searched the faces around her, hoping someone, anyone, would laugh, would tell her this was some elaborate joke. But no one smiled. Eyes dropped. Bodies shifted away from her, as if proximity itself was a risk. Dominic Moretti didn't move. He stood there like a king on a chessboard, already 10 steps ahead. His men subtly repositioned themselves, forming a loose wall between Isabella and the rest of the party. She hadn't noticed it happening, but now there was no denying it. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said quickly, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound steady. "I thought you were someone else. I'll leave." She turned toward the exit. A hand caught her wrist. Not rough, not gentle, controlled. The contact sent a jolt through her, heat rushing up her arm, fear tangling with something she refused to name. She looked down at his hand. Strong fingers, a faint scar across the knuckles, skin warm against hers. Dominic leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "If you walk away right now," he said calmly, "you'll draw more attention than if you stay." Her chest tightened. "That doesn't make me feel better." "It shouldn't," he replied. She looked up at him, searching his face for mercy. She found none, but she found restraint, and that confused her. A man like him could do anything. Everyone here knew it. And yet he hadn't, not yet. "Let her go," a drunk voice slurred from somewhere behind them. Silence fell like a blade. Dominic didn't even turn around. One of his men did instead, his stare enough to drain the color from the speaker's face. The man quickly disappeared into the crowd, suddenly very sober. Isabella's throat went dry. "People talk," Dominic said softly, "especially when they're afraid." "I don't belong in your world," she said, almost pleading now. His eyes flicked over her simple dress, her bare hands, the nervous way she pressed her lips together as if holding herself in one piece. "No," he agreed, "you don't." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they sounded like a verdict. Another whisper drifted through the air. "That's Moretti. Why is he with her?" Poor girl, poor girl. Isabella clenched her jaw. She hated how small they made her feel, how easily fear stripped away her dignity. She straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to meet Dominic's gaze. "I won't tell anyone," she said. "I swear, I'll forget this ever happened." Dominic studied her as if she were lying, or as if truth didn't matter. "Forget?" he repeated quietly. Fireworks cracked overhead again, white light reflecting in his dark eyes. For a moment she thought she saw something dangerous there. Not violence, but interest. A spark that promised consequences far worse than fear. "I don't forget," Dominic continued, "and I don't leave loose ends." Her pulse pounded. "Are you saying I'm a loose end?" He leaned in, his lips close enough that she felt his breath. "I'm saying," he murmured, "that you kissed the wrong man. At the worst possible time." Before she could respond, one of his men stepped forward, whispering urgently in Dominic's ear. Dominic's expression hardened instantly. The party noise swelled again, but Isabella felt the invisible line snap into place. Whatever this was, mistake, coincidence, fate, it was no longer small. And as Dominic Moretti tightened his grip on her wrist, Isabella realized something terrifying. She wasn't just being watched anymore. She was being kept. Dominic Moretti didn't smile. Men feared him too much for that. If he ever had, it had been buried years ago, along with weakness, mercy, and the kind of innocence Isabella still carried in her eyes. He stood unmoving at the center of the rooftop, fireworks flashing above him like a crown of fire, while the city below pulsed under his control. His tailored black suit fit him like armor, sharp lines concealing scars, sins, and a criminal empire that ruled the underworld not with noise, but with silence and blood. Isabella felt it now, the weight of his presence. This wasn't the kind of power that needed shouting or threats. It lived in the way people avoided his gaze, in how conversations died when he stepped closer, in how even armed men deferred to him with a single look. Dominic Moretti didn't command fear. He was fear. "You're shaking," he said quietly. She hadn't realized it until he pointed it out. Isabella clenched her hands, forcing herself to still them. "Anyone would be," she replied. "After realizing they just kissed a man who runs half this city," he finished for her. Her silence was answer enough. Dominic's eyes swept the rooftop, assessing threats, exits, angles, always calculating, always prepared. His men were already positioned perfectly, one near the elevators, another by the stairwell, two blending into the crowd. To everyone else, the party continued. To Dominic, it was a battlefield. "You should be screaming," he said, almost thoughtfully. "Should I?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes," he replied. "Most people do, or they cry, or they beg. And if I don't?" His gaze snapped back to her, sharp and focused. Something unreadable flickered there. "Then you're either very brave," he said, "or very foolish." Isabella lifted her chin. "Which one do you think I am?" For the first time, Dominic hesitated. That hesitation, barely a second, changed everything. He released her wrist slowly, as if testing whether she would run. She didn't. Instead, she rubbed the spot where his fingers had been, aware of the heat he'd left behind. "Dominic," one of his men murmured, stepping closer. "We shouldn't stay." "I know," Dominic replied without looking away from Isabella. "Is there danger?" she asked. "There's always danger," he said. "The difference is whether you see it coming." Another firework burst overhead, bathing his face in white light. That was when Isabella noticed the scars. Faint lines near his collarbone, one disappearing beneath his shirt cuff. Marks of violence, of survival. Proof that this man didn't just order bloodshed. He had lived it. "You don't belong here," Dominic said again, more firmly this time. "And after tonight, people will remember your face." Her stomach dropped. "So what happens now?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Now I decide how much of a problem you are." Her breath caught. "I'm not a problem. I'm just—" "A woman who kissed a Mafia boss in public," he interrupted. "On New Year's Eve, in front of rivals who would love to use you against me." The truth hit her like ice water. She wasn't a mistake. She was leverage. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I never would have." "I know," Dominic said again. And this time there was no patience in it. Only finality. But ignorance doesn't undo consequences. The music swelled as the DJ shouted, "Happy New Year." Confetti rained down. Couples laughed, oblivious. The world celebrated fresh beginnings. Dominic Moretti turned his body slightly, placing himself between Isabella and the crowd, an unconscious gesture of protection that didn't go unnoticed by his men. "From this moment on," he said quietly, "your life is no longer ordinary." Her heart raced. "What does that mean?" He met her eyes, dark and unwavering. "It means," Dominic Moretti said, "that the underworld has seen you, and it doesn't look away." As sirens wailed faintly in the distance, Isabella realized the truth she could no longer escape. The man who didn't smile had just stepped into her fate. And once Dominic Moretti noticed you, there was no going back. Isabella was everything Dominic Moretti wasn't. Warm, soft, unaware. She moved through the crowd with a lightness that seemed almost fragile against the backdrop of wealth, danger, and power that dominated the rooftop. Her laughter, hesitant and melodic, floated above the music like a delicate bird, completely oblivious to the shadows that clung to him, to the empire he carried on his shoulders. She had no idea that one misstep, one glance, one moment could mean the difference between life and death tonight. She worked hard, always had. Early mornings at the little design studio, late nights sketching, dreams no one else seemed to care about. She dreamed quietly, scribbling her ambitions in a notebook no one would read, and she believed in all her innocence that danger was something that happened to other people. Until tonight, Dominic watched her, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something other than control. Something he didn't often allow himself, fascination. She didn't shrink from the world. She didn't preen for attention. She simply existed, and that existence was sharp enough to cut through the armor he had spent decades building. "You don't belong here," he said again, voice low, threading through the chaos around them. "I know," Isabella replied softly, her gaze skimming the skyline. "I don't fit in this world. I just wanted a quiet night to celebrate the new year." Dominic's jaw tightened. She had no idea what she'd walked into, yet she stood with courage, a courage so raw that it unnerved even him. Her beauty wasn't just in her face, or in the soft waves of her hair. It was in her simplicity, her honesty, the kind of strength that only innocence could disguise. "You're lucky," he murmured almost to himself. "Most people in your position, they scream. They cry, they run." She turned toward him, startled by the sound of his voice so near, the dark intensity in his eyes, reflecting the fireworks above. "Lucky," she repeated, a small smile flickering, uncertain. "Yes," he said, "because I decide who gets to survive tonight, and who doesn't." Her stomach knotted. She didn't know whether to be terrified or intrigued, but she found herself standing taller, as if sheer will could shield her from the danger radiating from him. Dominic noticed. She wasn't like the others. She didn't tremble at his shadow or beg for mercy, and that irritated and fascinated him all at once. He wanted to see how far she would go, how much courage she really had, and against every rational thought he wanted her close. Closer than any ordinary person had any right to be. "You really don't know who you're dealing with," he said, his voice sharper now, a warning, threading through every syllable. "I think I do," Isabella replied, though her voice quivered just slightly. "I see danger, but I also see something else. Something I don't understand." Dominic's gaze darkened. He realized then that she was dangerously perceptive, more than most, and yet she had no idea that her life had just shifted onto a path that no one could reverse. She glanced at the crowd, at the oblivious partygoers, at the sparkling skyline, and then back at him. For a fleeting second, the gap between their worlds seemed impossible to bridge, and yet there was an invisible thread already pulling them together, one neither of them could ignore. Dominic exhaled slowly. Isabella didn't belong in his world, but perhaps for the first time in years, he didn't want her to leave it, because tonight, innocence had stepped into darkness, and darkness had noticed. The line between her safety and peril blurred with every heartbeat, and Dominic Moretti, the man who ruled an empire with blood and silence, realized something he hadn't allowed himself to admit in years. Isabella wasn't just a complication. She was a challenge he intended to claim. And for the first time, the thought of losing her terrified him. Dominic should have walked away. He really should have. The city sprawled beneath them, alive with lights and noise. And yet, for Dominic Moretti, everything else faded the moment he looked at Isabella. Every rule he had lived by, every careful distance he maintained from people, every calculated decision designed to protect himself and his empire, tonight none of it mattered. Her trembling wasn't weakness, it was honesty. Pure, unfiltered, impossible to ignore. In a world full of lies, deals, and masks, Isabella's vulnerability shone like a beacon, and honesty was rare in his world, too rare to let slip. He watched her straighten her shoulders despite the fear in her eyes, noticed the way she forced her hands to stop shaking, saw the instinctive courage in her small gestures. It was infuriating and magnetic. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper, though it held more defiance than she realized. Dominic's jaw tightened. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of his gaze settle over her. It wasn't accusation. It wasn't judgment. It was attention. Total, unbroken attention. The kind that made her heart race and her thoughts scatter. "You shouldn't be here," he finally said, voice low, measured. "Not in this world. Not like this." She swallowed, trying to summon the courage to speak. "Then why are you still standing here?" Dominic stepped closer, the faint scent of danger, expensive cologne mixed with something darker, filling her senses. He didn't reach for her, didn't need to. His presence alone was a pull, a gravity she couldn't resist. "I should," he said simply. "I should walk away and pretend this never happened. Pretend you're just another stranger at a New Year party." "And?" she asked, daring to meet his eyes despite the tremor in her voice. "And pretending is a luxury I don't allow myself," he admitted. His voice was almost a growl, quiet but intense. "Not when you're in front of me. Not when you've—" He paused, the words hanging in the air like smoke. "When you've already broken every rule I've lived by." Her heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what rules he meant, but the weight of them pressed down on her, leaving her both terrified and drawn closer. "You're dangerous," she said, her voice trembling more from awe than fear. Dominic's lips curved, just the slightest fraction, almost imperceptible. "Dangerous is one word. For it," he replied, eyes never leaving hers. "I prefer inevitable." The word settled over her like fire, and she realized with a sinking thrill that there was no escaping him. Not tonight, not ever. She wasn't just caught in his world by chance. She was caught in him. For Dominic, the pull was undeniable. Every instinct screamed to protect, to claim, to dominate, and yet there was a restraint in him that surprised even himself. He wasn't used to restraint, not with people, not with anyone. And yet something about Isabella, the softness, the honesty, the quiet bravery, made him hesitate, made him want, made him care in a way that was unfamiliar and dangerous. Her hand brushed against hers as she shifted slightly, a careless motion that sent a jolt up his spine. He fought the impulse to grab her, to pull her into the chaos of his world, to erase the line between danger and desire. Dominic should have walked away, but he didn't, because she was everything he wasn't. And he couldn't resist the pull of honesty, the rare, blazing truth that refused to hide, even in the dark, even in the world he ruled with blood and fear. Tonight, Dominic Moretti realized something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Some rules were made to be broken, and some women were impossible to let go. The New Year countdown echoed through the grand hall, bouncing off gilded walls and crystal chandeliers. 10, 9, 8. The music and laughter swelled around them, but Dominic Moretti's attention was elsewhere. His eyes never left Isabella, scanning the crowd like a predator reading a map of threats. Something shifted in the way people moved, the way whispers passed from guest to guest. Then he saw it, a pair of eyes, cold and calculating, fixated on her. A rival. The kind of man who would kill without hesitation, who would take pleasure in leaving chaos in his wake. And he wasn't looking for Dominic tonight. He was looking for her. Dominic's jaw tightened. Every muscle in his body tensed. The party, once a glittering celebration of lights and music, suddenly felt like a battlefield. The countdown became irrelevant. Fireworks exploded outside the windows, brilliant and blinding, but Dominic saw only the threat drawing closer, circling Isabella like a predator sizing up prey. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a warning, a barrier between her and the danger she didn't yet understand. Isabella felt it too, though she couldn't place why the room seemed suddenly smaller, tighter. She turned instinctively toward Dominic, seeking reassurance. His dark eyes met hers, and in them, she saw both protection and a warning. Do not underestimate what's coming.
7, Mom.
The rival moved with calculated precision, weaving through the crowd, keeping his distance but maintaining sight of Isabella. Dominic's fingers brushed hers, a subtle gesture, grounding her. It wasn't comforting. It was a signal. Stay close. Follow my lead. The seconds ticked down, and the tension built. Around them, couples clinked glasses and cheered, oblivious to the danger closing in. Dominic's mind raced. Security angles, exit routes, the possibility of weapons hidden among the party guests. Every instinct honed over years of ruling the city's underworld screamed at him. Act now, or it's too late. 4, 3. Isabella's pulse quickened as she followed his subtle guidance, staying just a step behind him, trusting instincts she didn't yet understand. She wanted to speak, to ask what was happening, but one look at Dominic silenced her. His jaw was set, eyes hard, hands poised for action. This wasn't a man playing at protection. This was a man ready to annihilate anyone who threatened. What was his? 2, 1. The countdown ended, fireworks exploding in a dazzling display of gold and red. The crowd cheered, unaware of the storm brewing in the shadows. Dominic's gaze never wavered from the rival, now closer, assessing, calculating. Isabella realized, with a mix of fear and awe, that she was in the presence of a man who saw everything, missed nothing, and would not hesitate to strike if it meant keeping her safe. Dominic whispered, low and commanding, so only she could hear. Stay behind me, don't move. He shifted slightly, positioning himself between her and the threat, body tense like a coiled spring. The party glittered around them, oblivious, but for Dominic and Isabella, the night had transformed. The celebration was over. The enemy was here, and Dominic Moretti would make sure he left with nothing but silence in his wake. Because tonight Isabella wasn't just a guest at a New Year party. She was the target, and Dominic had already decided she would not be harmed. Stay close, Dominic whispered. It wasn't a request. Not really. His voice was calm, low, but every syllable carried the weight of command, the kind that brooked no argument. Isabella instinctively obeyed, stepping slightly behind him, letting him guide her through the crowd. Every brush of his hand against hers was deliberate, protective, and impossible to ignore. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the pulse of the music, the distant fireworks, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She wanted to protest, to pull away, to claim her independence. But Dominic's presence made it impossible. Being near him wasn't safe, but it was safer than any other option. Because once the Mafia noticed you, there was no unseeing you. She tried to imagine the life she'd had before tonight, the quiet, mundane existence she thought she'd mastered. Work, home, small dreams that didn't involve danger, bullets, or men with eyes like black ice. And yet, in the span of a single kiss, her world had shifted, and the ordinary had been ripped away. Dominic's gaze swept over the room like a predator hunting, sharp and unrelenting. His men flanked them seamlessly, moving in patterns so subtle she almost didn't notice. But her instincts told her otherwise. Every step she took was measured, every movement calculated, as if the very air around them had turned into a battlefield. A waiter passed by holding a tray of champagne glasses, and Dominic's eyes flicked to the man for a split second. That was all it took. An unspoken signal, and the tray tilted, just slightly, preventing a collision. Small gestures, almost invisible to anyone else but for Dominic. Everything mattered. Why are you doing this? Isabella whispered, barely audible. He didn't answer immediately. He simply turned his head slightly, his dark eyes meeting hers. And the intensity there made her shiver. I can't let anything happen to you, he said finally, voice low and controlled. And I can't guarantee anyone else will. She tried to process the meaning behind the words. Protection? Possession? Both? She didn't know. But one thing was clear. She wasn't just a woman at a party anymore. She was marked. She was visible in a world where visibility was dangerous, and the man beside her didn't intend to let that happen. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. a guest noticing her presence, a stranger glancing. Too long. Dominic's jaw tightened imperceptibly, his attention snapping instantly. The world around them blurred into the background. Only he, Isabella, and the threat remained. She wanted to step back, to insist she could handle herself, but Dominic's hand brushed hers. Again, firm, unyielding, not controlling, but guiding, protecting. And that simple contact sent a shiver of awareness down her spine, a mixture of fear and something else she couldn't name. "You have to trust me," he murmured, not as a question, but as a command. Isabella nodded, swallowing hard. Trusting him felt dangerous, but running felt impossible. His presence enveloped her, a shield of power and menace she hadn't realized she craved. The music swelled. The laughter of strangers filled the room, and fireworks cracked overhead, brilliant and loud. And yet, amid all the celebration, Isabella understood with chilling clarity, nothing would ever be ordinary again. Once Dominic Moretti noticed you, once the Mafia marked you, the line between safety and danger disappeared, and Isabella had just stepped across it. Isabella's chest heaved as panic clawed at her throat. The glittering party felt suddenly suffocating, the laughter and music turning into a dizzying blur. She needed air, space, freedom, anything that didn't involve the dark intensity of Dominic Moretti standing so close that she could feel the heat radiating off him. She took a step back, then another, intending to slip through the crowd unnoticed. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, betraying her attempts at subtlety. "Wait." Dominic's voice was calm, but it carried the kind of authority that froze her in place. She ignored him and tried again. A few more steps, a quick turn toward the exit. Her hand grazed the railing, ready to pull herself toward safety. Then strong hands caught her wrist, firm, unyielding, impossible to shake off. She spun, heart racing. "Let me go," she whispered, voice trembling, barely above the music. Dominic's dark eyes met hers. He didn't release her. Instead, he leaned in slightly, the faint scent of expensive cologne and something sharper, more dangerous, washing over her. Senses. He was close enough that she could feel the heat from his body, the subtle tension in every muscle. "Too late," he said, low, deliberate, and final. Her pulse thundered. Too late for what? He didn't answer immediately. His gaze swept over the crowd, scanning for threats, calculating distances, noting exits, noting angles. Every instinct honed by years of control and danger flickered across his face, and Isabella realized he wasn't thinking about her leaving because of jealousy. He was thinking about what would happen if she tried to leave. "You don't understand," he said quietly, his hand still firm on her wrist. "Once you're in this world, there's no walking away, not tonight, not ever." Her stomach twisted. "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," he replied, his tone sharper now, a warning beneath the calm. "But this world doesn't ask. It takes. And tonight, you've been seen." Isabella's mind raced. Seen by who? Who could possibly notice her in a crowd of strangers? Then the truth hit her. The rival. The eyes that had lingered too long. The underworld didn't forgive mistakes. And kissing Dominic Moretti in public. That wasn't just a mistake. Dominic leaned even closer, his lips near her ear, his breath brushing her skin. "I warned you," he murmured. "This isn't about choice. This is survival. And I don't let anyone harm." "What's mine?" Her throat went dry. The word mine echoed in her mind, igniting fear and something else she couldn't name. She wanted to pull away, but the magnetic pull of his presence made her freeze. The crowd continued around them, oblivious, laughing and clinking glasses, celebrating the start of a new year. But for Isabella, time had slowed. Every sound, every movement seemed secondary to the grip of the man standing in front of her. The man who didn't smile, who didn't joke, who didn't falter. The man who had just declared without a single threat that her fate no longer belonged to her. "Too late," he repeated, softer this time, almost tender. And in that moment, Isabella understood the terrifying truth. She could try to escape, but Dominic Moretti would not let her go. Because once he had claimed your attention, once you crossed into his world, there was no leaving. A shot rang out. The sharp crack cut through the music, slicing through laughter and chatter like a knife. Glasses trembled on tables, and in the next heartbeat, screams erupted, shrill and panicked as chaos spilled across the New Year party like wildfire. Isabella froze for a fraction of a second, heart hammering in her chest. Then instinct kicked, and before she could move, Dominic Moretti's arms were around her, strong and unyielding. He pressed her to his chest, shielding her as if she were fragile porcelain in the midst of a storm. Bullets tore through champagne glasses, sending shards sparkling across the marble floor. The sound was deafening, a symphony of destruction that drowned out music and fireworks alike. Guests dove for cover, stumbling, screaming. Their New Year celebration instantly transformed into a battlefield. Dominic's body was taut, a living barrier between Isabella and the threat. His eyes scanned the room with predatory precision, calculating exits, angles, and the location of every weapon in sight. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, fluid. He didn't panic, he didn't hesitate. But the danger radiating from the crowd pressed in like ice. "Stay down!" he hissed, voice rough with urgency. She obeyed instinctively, curling closer against him, feeling the warmth and terrifying power of his chest beneath her cheek. Her pulse raced as adrenaline surged, the thrum of bullets and screams pounding in her ears. A waiter dove behind a table, glasses flying, while a man in a tuxedo froze mid-step, eyes wide with disbelief. Dominic's men responded instantly, moving through the crowd like shadows, disarming threats and creating a perimeter around him and Isabella. Every move was synchronized, rehearsed, efficient. Every second mattered. Isabella's fingers clenched into his jacket. She could feel the tension in him, coiled like a spring, ready to strike. His jaw was tight, eyes sharp and alert, scanning every corner, every door. She realized with a jolt. Dominic Moretti didn't just survive this world, he ruled it. The chaos escalated. Guests screamed and ran, chairs toppled and champagne spilled, mixing, with shards of glass to glitter like blood under the low lights. Dominic's presence was the only constant amid the madness. "You're going to be okay," he murmured, his breath brushing her hair. "I won't let anything happen to you." She wanted to believe him, but the terror in the room made it hard. Bullets whizzed past, smashing into walls, shattering crystal, echoing like the crack of doom. She clung to him tighter, knowing that without him she wouldn't stand a chance. Dominic's gaze flicked to a shadow moving too fast across the room. A rival. The same man, whose eyes had locked onto her earlier. Dominic's hand shifted slightly, brushing against the hilt of a concealed weapon, and the air around him seemed to crackle with lethal promise. The world narrowed to two realities, him and her. Everything else, the screams, the shattered glasses, the chaos, faded into a blur. She was his to protect, and he would not fail. Another gunshot rang out, closer this time, and he tightened his grip on her, pressing her closer, against him. "Stay with me," he ordered. Isabella nodded, heart hammering, realizing that the New Year's celebration had become a war zone. And in that war, Dominic Moretti was her shield, her weapon, and her only chance of survival. The illusions of safety, the glittering party lights, and the carefree joy of midnight. Everything was gone, shattered, just like the champagne glasses around them, and in the center of it all stood Dominic, unflinching, unyielding, and terrifyingly alive. She had no idea what came next, but one thing was certain. With him, she would face it. Because tonight, survival wasn't luck. It was him. When it was over, silence fell like a heavy curtain over the ruined ballroom. Bodies lay still, some unconscious, others worse. The glittering celebration of just moments ago had been replaced by shattered glass, spilled champagne, and the lingering scent of smoke and gunpowder. The echoes of chaos slowly faded, leaving only the low hum of panic and shock. Dominic Moretti's hands were stained red, proof of the violence that had erupted, and the price he had paid to keep her alive. Yet Isabella, pressed against him in the center of the destruction, was untouched. Safe. Whole. Protected. She stared at him, her voice barely a whisper, trembling with disbelief. You saved me." Dominic didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the room one last time, sharp and calculating, before finally resting on her. The faint glint of blood on his knuckles contrasted with the calm authority in his posture. Every instinct in him had screamed to keep her safe, and he had chosen her safety over secrecy, over discretion, over everything he had worked so hard to control. "That's not a gift," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, edged with warning. "It's a choice, and every choice has a cost." Isabella's stomach dropped. She didn't need him to elaborate, she could see it. The men who had threatened them were neutralized, but Dominic's hands, the way his jaw was set, the tension in his shoulders, it all spoke of consequences. Blood debts, enemies watching, favors unpaid, alliances broken. He had risked everything in an instant, and she was at the center of it. "Why me?" she asked, fear and awe warring in her voice. "Why not? Anyone else?" Dominic's gaze darkened. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, the power in every controlled movement. "Because," he murmured, "you were in the wrong place at the right time, and I don't leave what's mine unprotected." Her pulse quickened. "Mine?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he allowed the quiet moment to stretch, letting her understand without explanation. His hands, though still bearing traces of blood, moved with deliberate care to steady her trembling. His eyes locked onto hers, intense and unyielding, silently commanding her attention, her obedience, her trust. The reality hit her like ice water. In a world ruled by Dominic Moretti, nothing was free. Nothing came without cost. And now, she was entangled in it. "You've just stepped into my world," he continued, voice dropping to a near whisper. "And nothing will be the same again. Every move you make from now on will be watched. Every breath you take noticed." Isabella swallowed, the weight of his words pressing down on her. Fear mingled with something far more dangerous. Curiosity, adrenaline, a magnetic pull toward him she couldn't ignore. She wanted to pull away, to regain control, but the truth was clear. The choice he had made to save her, deliberate, violent, absolute, had bound her to him, and to his world, irrevocably. Dominic stepped back slightly, still keeping her within his peripheral vision. "Understand this," he said, tone hardening. "I protect. I don't negotiate. And I certainly don't forgive mistakes that put what's mine at risk." Isabella shivered, torn between gratitude and terror. She had survived the gunfire, the chaos, the threat. But she had survived because he had chosen her. And now, she realized, she owed him more than she could ever measure. The night had ended. The party was over. But the consequences of Dominic Moretti's choice were just beginning, because in his world, being alive was never enough. Survival came with chains, and she had just been shackled. "You killed for me," Isabella said, her voice breaking as the reality finally crashed down on her. The words tasted unreal, heavy, impossible. She stared at Dominic's hands again, steady now, but still marked with red. Proof of what he'd done. Proof of what he was willing to do. Dominic met her gaze without flinching. "I kill for what's mine," he replied. There was no pride in his tone. No apology either. Just fact. Cold, unvarnished truth delivered with the same certainty he used to issue orders and sign death warrants. The words terrified her. They thrilled her too. Isabella hated herself for that split second of heat that curled in her stomach, the way her breath caught when he said mine again. It was wrong. It was dangerous. And yet, standing in the aftermath of violence, wrapped in the protection of the most feared man in the city, part of her felt safer than she ever had before. "That's not normal," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Dominic's eyes softened. Not much, but enough that she noticed. "Neither is surviving what you just did," he said. "You don't come out of nights like this unchanged." Around them, sirens wailed closer now, blue and red lights flickering against the broken windows. Dominic's men were already moving, efficient and silent, clearing the space, erasing evidence, controlling the narrative. The world would never know what really happened here. It never did. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. "You didn't even hesitate," she said. "Not once." "No," he agreed, "because hesitation gets people killed." Her gaze dropped to the floor, where shattered glass crunched underfoot and dark stains spread across white marble. "I don't want anyone to die because of me." Dominic stepped closer, his presence immediate, overwhelming. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "None of this is on you. The moment they looked at you as leverage, their fate was sealed." She looked up sharply. "You decided that." "Yes," he said without hesitation. "That's what power is." The honesty of it stole her breath. There were no excuses, no moral justifications. He didn't pretend to be good. He simply was what he was, a man who ruled through fear and precision, who protected his own with blood if necessary. "And what am I supposed to do now?" she asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "Just accept this? Accept you?" Dominic studied her carefully, as if weighing 1,000 possibilities. "For now," he said, "you stay alive, you stay close, and you let me handle the rest." "That sounds like a prison," she said. His lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something darker. "It's a fortress," he corrected. "There's a difference." She should have argued, should have pushed back harder. But exhaustion and adrenaline had left her raw, her defenses stripped away, and beneath the fear, beneath the shock, there was something else growing, an awareness of him that felt dangerous and undeniable. "You scare me," she admitted quietly. "That's good," Dominic replied. "Fear keeps you alive." He reached out, hesitating for the first time since the night began, then gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. The touch was unexpectedly careful, almost reverent. "And yet," he added softly, "you're still standing here." Isabella's heart pounded. She didn't pull away. She understood it now, the terrible truth she could no longer deny. Dominic Moretti was a monster, but tonight he had been her monster. And that realization, terrifying, intoxicating, irreversible, settled deep in her chest, binding her to him in ways blood alone never could. Dominic didn't speak as he led Isabella through the chaotic streets, his hand firm but not harsh, on the small of her back. The city lights blurred past them, neon reflections dancing off the wet pavement. But her mind was only half there. The other half was still racing, replaying the chaos of the party, the bullets, the blood, and the man who had saved her, and yet terrified her more than anyone ever had. When they arrived at his penthouse, the doors closed behind them with a definitive click that echoed through the expansive apartment. Locked, guarded, untouchable. Isabella spun around, panic surging. What is this? You can't just bring me here?" Dominic stepped closer, towering and unyielding, his presence filling the space like a shadow of steel. "You're not leaving," he said simply. "I'm not?" Her voice cracked as she struggled to comprehend. "Dominic, this is kidnapping!" He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. He tilted his head, eyes dark and steady, studying her reaction as though evaluating whether her fear was genuine or performative. "No," he corrected calmly. This is protection. Her knees nearly buckled. Protection? You call locking me in a penthouse and surrounding me with armed men protection? He stepped closer, and the heat radiating off him made it impossible to think. Yes, because if you leave, if you step out of my sight tonight, you will be a target. You were already noticed. That makes you dangerous. She swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the marble countertop to steady herself. I'm not dangerous. I'm just a woman trying to have a normal New Year's Eve. Dominic's expression softened, just slightly, though the intensity in his eyes never wavered. Normal doesn't exist for you anymore. Not with me, not tonight. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she realized how utterly inescapable this was. She had imagined the night ending differently. Celebrations, laughter, maybe even the hopeful spark of a new beginning. Instead, she was trapped in the lion's den, with the king himself guarding her. Look around, he said, his voice low, almost intimate. Doors locked, guards positioned, cameras discreetly placed. You are safe, you are untouchable. But that safety isn't optional. You need it. I don't need it, she snapped, fear sharpening into defiance. I can take care of myself. Dominic's lips curved into the faintest smirk. Less a smile, more a dark acknowledgement. You think you can. I admire the courage. I truly do. But I've spent my life in a world where courage isn't enough. Survival requires control, and I control your environment. That's how you survive tonight. Her chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to pull away, to reclaim autonomy, but something, in the way he moved, the way he carried himself, the unshakable certainty in his voice made her hesitate. Fear tangled with fascination, and she hated how that felt. He closed the distance slightly, brushing her hair back with a finger, gentle yet possessive. This isn't punishment, Isabella. Not for you. It's precaution, for your life and for mine. Her throat went dry. She had survived bullets, chaos, and blood. But now, locked in his penthouse, surrounded by his power and control, she realized survival was no longer about running. It was about enduring, and perhaps, just perhaps, trusting the man who had put her in this cage of protection. And Dominic Moretti, calm, commanding, and impossibly dark, had made it very clear there was no leaving. Not tonight, not ever. Days passed. The penthouse, once a place of stark control and suffocating fear, became a gilded cage where time slowed and every moment stretched too long. Isabella moved carefully, each step, measured, aware of the ever-present eyes that tracked her, of the subtle barrier Dominic Moretti maintained between her and the outside world. Tension thickened in the air like smoke. Every glance between them was charged, a silent conversation neither dared to speak aloud. Eyes met over breakfast trays, across the spacious living room, in hallways where shadows fell and secrets lingered. Every look burned, igniting something dangerous beneath the surface. Every touch lingered too long. The brush of a hand against hers as he handed her a drink. The slight adjustment of a stray strand of hair from her face. The weight of his body near hers when he passed through a doorway. Small, seemingly innocent actions. But for Isabella, they left a trail of heat and confusion that made her pulse race. Dominic fought himself harder than he'd ever fought enemies. He had spent years perfecting control, mastering fear, and commanding respect in a world that respected only power. Yet with her, that control was slipping. Every time she laughed, a soft, uncertain sound, or met his gaze without flinching, he felt a pull he could not deny. Desire, protection, possession, all tangled together, blurring the lines between what he wanted and what he should allow. Isabella, he said one evening, voice low, cautious, as they stood side by side near the balcony overlooking the city. Do you understand the danger you're in? Yes, she replied quickly, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. I know, I see it. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he shifted slightly, a subtle motion that brought him closer. The faint scent of his cologne, mixed with something darker, enveloped her. She felt it, creep into her senses, making her dizzy, making her aware of every inch between them. Do you trust me? He asked finally, his tone deceptively soft. She hesitated. Trust. It was complicated, terrifying, And yet some unexplainable thread pulled her toward him, even as every rational thought screamed to resist. I want to, she said, voice barely audible. Dominic's jaw clenched. That simple admission made his chest tighten, his instincts screaming. To claim, to protect, to dominate. But restraint held him back. He would not let desire dictate actions here. Not yet. Not when danger lurked around every corner, when enemies were patient and waiting. Every meal, every conversation, every shared space became a battleground of emotion. Isabella wanted normalcy, fleeting though it was. Dominic wanted control, clarity, and safety. But his heart betrayed him, betraying every rule he had lived by for years. And yet the tension was intoxicating. It drew them together and pushed them apart, in equal measure. Moments stretched, touches lingered, glances burned. And every day that passed, the invisible barrier between predator and prey, boss and innocent, hardened into something neither of them could ignore. By the third day, it was clear. Neither wanted to admit it, neither could resist it, and neither could escape the heat building between them. Dominic Moretti had fought armies, survived betrayals, and ruled with blood and fear, but nothing had tested him like the presence of Isabella. And Isabella had survived bullets, chaos, and captivity, but nothing had shaken her like him. They were locked in proximity, locked in tension, locked in a dangerous orbit that neither could escape, and both knew it. Then the threat came. It arrived quietly, delivered by a courier who dared not linger. A folded note, black ink smeared, slightly as if in haste, and a symbol Isabella didn't recognize at first, sharp, jagged, unmistakably menacing. Her fingers trembled as she held it, reading the words scrawled with cruel precision. She has a price. We know where she is. Dominic saw it before she could hide it. His eyes darkened instantly, storm clouds gathering in, their depths. The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of control and dominance, suddenly felt too small for the rage that flared within him. He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. He ripped the note from her hands and crumpled it between his fists. Then, with a strength that spoke of years spent breaking walls, breaking men, he slammed his fist into the polished marble table. Wood splintered. Glasses shattered. Champagne bottles toppled. Isabella gasped, startled, but even amid fear she noticed the terrifying beauty in his fury. Controlled, precise, and utterly unrelenting. Dominic Moretti didn't just protect. He obliterated anything that threatened what was his. "No one touches her," he growled, voice low, dangerous, reverberating through the penthouse like a verdict. She stared at him, heart racing, torn between awe and fear. He had killed for her once. She had seen it, felt it. And now, this raw, unfiltered rage made clear that any attempt on her life would be met with a storm the world had never seen before. Dominic's hands shook slightly, though only from the intensity of his own power, not weakness. He tore another piece of paper from the table and crumpled it, eyes burning. Every muscle in his body radiated lethal intent. The guards stationed in the corners stiffened instinctively, sensing the shift in his energy. Isabella's voice trembled as she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Dominic, what does this mean?" "It means," he said, turning to face her fully, his gaze locking on hers with iron will, "that you are no longer just a woman at a New Year's party. You are a target, and I will make sure, by blood, by fire, by whatever it takes, that no one lays a finger on you." Her chest tightened. The weight of his promise, the scope of his threat made the room feel simultaneously smaller and infinitely dangerous. She realized, with a mix of terror and thrill, that the world outside this penthouse no longer mattered. Survival wasn't just luck anymore. It was him. Dominic stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near growl. "Anyone who comes near you, anyone, will regret it. And I don't forgive easily." The rage in him was palpable, a living force that seemed to vibrate through the walls, the air, the very floor beneath them. Isabella's hands went to his chest instinctively, feeling the taut strength beneath the tailored suit, the energy coiled and ready to strike. I understand, she whispered, aware that nothing could have prepared her for this life, or for him. Dominic didn't answer with words. His eyes alone promised vengeance, protection, and an unyielding claim. The note lay crumpled on the floor, insignificant against the storm he had become. No one touches her, he repeated, quieter this time, but with the same lethal certainty. And Isabella understood. In Dominic Moretti's world, that wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Isabella didn't beg. The note still lay crushed on the floor, the symbol burned into her mind, the truth of it settling heavy in her chest. Fear was there. She wasn't foolish enough to deny it, but she refused to let it define her. Slowly, deliberately, she straightened her spine and lifted her chin, meeting Dominic's gaze without flinching. She stood taller. "If I'm in your world now," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her, "I won't be weak." The words hung in the air between them. For a long moment, Dominic said nothing. He simply stared at her, dark eyes searching, measuring, as if seeing her for the first time all over again. He had expected tears, fear, dependence. That was what people usually offered him when the danger closed in, but not this. Not her. Something flickered in his expression. Brief, dangerous, unmistakable. Pride. "You don't know what you're saying," he replied finally, his voice low, controlled. "My world breaks people, strong people." "I know," Isabella said. "I've seen enough to understand that much." She took a step closer, refusing to retreat. "But I won't survive by hiding behind you forever. If I stay, I stand on my own feet." Dominic's jaw tightened. The instinct to shield her, to command her obedience surged through him. He wanted to order her back, remind her exactly who he was, what he controlled. But another part of him, the part he tried to bury, respected courage when he saw it. "You think strength is standing tall?" he asked quietly. "Strength in my world is endurance. It's loss. It's doing what must be done and living with the consequences." "Then teach me," she said simply. The words hit him harder than any threat ever had. "Teach me. Not rescue me, not save me. Teach me." Dominic exhaled slowly, tension radiating through his frame. He had spent his life making sure no one followed him into the dark. And now this woman, warm, brave, dangerous in her own way, was asking to step in willingly. "You shouldn't want this," he said. "I don't want danger," Isabella replied. "I want to survive, and I won't survive by pretending I'm still the woman I was before that night." Her honesty struck deep. He recognized it instantly, the same kind of brutal truth he lived by, stripped of comfort and illusion. Dominic stepped closer until they were only inches apart. "If you stand with me," he warned, "there's no halfway, no pretending, no turning back when it gets ugly." She didn't look away. "I won't." For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Dominic lifted a hand, hesitating just before touching her shoulder. A rare pause, a rare restraint. When his fingers finally rested there, the touch was firm, grounding, acknowledging her choice. "Then listen carefully," he said. "Courage will keep you standing. Discipline will keep you alive." Isabella nodded, heart pounding, not with fear this time, but resolve. Dominic withdrew his hand, but his gaze lingered. Pride burned quietly in his eyes, mingled with something far more dangerous. Respect. And respect in Dominic Moretti's world was the beginning of something powerful. She hadn't begged. She hadn't broken. She had chosen to stand. And Dominic knew, with unsettling certainty, that Isabella was far stronger than anyone, including herself, had ever realized. Dominic stood in the penthouse, the city lights sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he both ruled and feared. The chaos of the last few nights had faded into a tense quiet, but the weight of what had happened, and what was still coming, pressed heavily on him. He looked at Isabella, standing across the room, eyes fierce and unyielding. She had survived bullets, threats, and the darkest edges of his world. And yet she remained unbroken. Her courage, her honesty, her refusal to cower. It had sparked something in him that he hadn't felt in years. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, the distance between them shrinking until it was only a few heartbeats wide. His dark gaze locked onto hers, unflinching, unrelenting. "You don't understand what it means to be in my world," he said, his voice low, steady, a dangerous promise wrapped in control. "You've seen a fraction of it, and it's enough to scare anyone else away. But not you. You've stood through fire, and yet you still stand." Isabella's chest rose and fell, her hands clenched at her sides, but she didn't flinch. "I vowed to protect you," Dominic continued, his jaw tight, voice raw with restrained intensity. "Not just tonight. Not just from enemies who want to harm you. From everything. Every danger, every knife in the dark, every whisper that could undo you. I will be there. I will be the storm that obliterates anyone who dares touch what's mine." She swallowed hard, realizing the magnitude of his words. You can't control everything," she whispered. "I can," he corrected, dark and absolute. "I will. And I choose to, over and over again, because letting you be hurt, not protecting you, is something I cannot bear. I won't allow it, ever." His hands curled into fists at his sides, though his eyes never left hers. The intensity of his promise radiated, almost suffocating in its sincerity. "You don't know what you're doing to me," Isabella said, voice trembling between fear and something else. Desire, awe, a connection that terrified and thrilled her. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he said, stepping closer, every inch purposeful, controlled, dominant. "I'm claiming my responsibility. I'm staking my claim. I'm making a vow that no one, not enemies, not fate, not the world, will ever take you from me." The room seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of them in a charged silence. The city's lights, below, casting long shadows across their faces. Isabella felt the weight of his words press against her, and for the first time, she realized the truth she had been running from. Dominic, Moretti wasn't just dangerous, he was relentless, unyielding, and terrifyingly devoted. "I vow," he said again, voice softer now but no less potent, "that as long as I draw breath, nothing, no one, will hurt you. You are mine to protect, and I will never fail. Not now, not ever." Isabella's breath caught, a mixture of fear, awe, and something she couldn't yet name. The vow was more than words. It was power, promise, and possession rolled into one. And in Dominic, Moretti's world, a vow meant blood, consequence, and inevitability. She nodded, unable to speak, her eyes fixed on him. She had crossed into his world, survived its dangers, and now she understood. She was part of something that could consume her, or redefine her, and Dominic Moretti? He had made his vow, and there would be no breaking it. Dominic cupped her face. His hands were warm, steady, hands that had ended lives without hesitation, now trembling just slightly against her skin. His thumbs brushed her cheeks with an intimacy that felt far more dangerous than violence ever could. "That kiss," he whispered, his voice rough, stripped of command and armor, "sealed your fate." The words should have terrified her. They did. But beneath the fear was something deeper, stronger, a pull she could no longer deny. Isabella's breath hitched. Every instinct she'd been raised with screamed at her to step back, to remember who he was, what he was. The Mafia boss, the man whose name alone made grown men lower their eyes, the man whose world devoured innocence. She should have pulled away. Instead, she kissed him back. It wasn't reckless. It was inevitable. Her lips met his softly at first, as if testing the edge of a blade. For a heartbeat, Dominic froze. The entire world seemed to stop. The city lights below, the danger outside the walls, the blood on his past. All of it vanished beneath the weight of that choice. Then Dominic groaned, low, restrained, dangerous. His hands tightened, one sliding into her hair, the other pulling her closer, as if letting go would shatter them both. The kiss deepened, no longer gentle, no longer hesitant. It was hunger held, back for too long, control unraveling thread by thread. This wasn't a kiss born of romance. It was possession meeting surrender, fire meeting fate. Isabella felt it. His restraint fighting his desire, his need battling his fear of corrupting her. The power in him was overwhelming, but so was the care. He kissed her like she mattered, like she was the only thing anchoring him to something human. When they finally parted, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling. Dominic's eyes were darker now, changed. "You don't know what you've just done," he murmured. "I do," Isabella replied softly. "I chose." That word struck him harder than the kiss. Chosen. No one ever chose Dominic Moretti without being forced, bought, or broken. Yet here she was, standing in his world, heart exposed, fear acknowledged, still choosing him. He pulled back slightly, searching her face. "Once you cross this line, there's no undoing it. My enemies won't see you as innocent. They'll see leverage, weakness." "Then don't let me be weak," she said. His jaw clenched. Desire warred with something darker, fear. Not of losing control, but of losing her. "I will burn this city to ash before I let them touch you," he said. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I'm not running." Silence stretched between them, thick with meaning. Dominic brushed his thumb over her lower lip, where her kiss still lingered. "That New Year's night," he said quietly. "I thought fate made a mistake." "And now?" she asked. "Now I know," he said. "It was a warning. A warning that the man who ruled the shadows had finally found something worth destroying the world for." He kissed her again, but this time slower, intentional, a promise rather than a claim. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Enemies moved, plans formed. But inside the penthouse, something irreversible had happened. Isabella was no longer just under Dominic Moretti's protection. She was under his heart, and Dominic knew, with terrifying certainty, that loving her would be the most dangerous war he would ever fight. Sirens wailed below, slicing through the night like knives. The city had already shifted under Dominic Moretti's gaze, the streets alive with danger he could feel in his bones. But tonight, the threats weren't random. They were precise, calculated. Closing in on the penthouse with a purpose that made Dominic's jaw tighten and his heart race, faster than he would admit. Isabella stood beside him, seemingly calm, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, her eyes scanning the city lights below. But Dominic noticed the subtle twitch of her fingers, the way her jaw clenched for just a fraction of a second. She was ready. She had seen more than anyone realized. Enemies closed in. Shadows moved through the streets, their intentions sharp, lethal, and very personal. Dominic's mind raced, calculating exits, contingencies, and the number of shots it would take to hold them off. But then something shifted. Isabella's gaze flicked toward him, sharp, knowing. Something in her stance, her expression, betrayed a history he hadn't yet uncovered. Her past, the innocence he had assumed, was not what it seemed. There were secrets in her eyes, skills she hadn't yet revealed. And for the first time, Dominic realized he had misjudged the storm standing beside him. "She's not just a woman," he murmured under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. And in that moment, the truth hit him. He hadn't claimed the wrong woman. He had claimed a storm, one that could burn, destroy, and challenge everything he thought he controlled. One that could match his fire, his darkness, and his ruthless world. Outside, tires screeched. Shadows moved against the glow of streetlights. His enemies had underestimated her, and perhaps even him. Dominic's hands curled into fists at his sides, his breath steady despite the chaos. He stepped, closer to Isabella, the air between them electric, charged with danger, trust, and a growing, terrifying bond. "You're full of surprises," he said, voice low, almost a growl. She smirked faintly, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "And you love it." He didn't answer immediately. He only tightened his grip on the hidden weapon beneath his coat, eyes scanning every movement outside. Because tonight, nothing would be simple. Nothing would be safe. And Dominic Moretti knew one unshakable truth. This storm wasn't going anywhere. Not ever, and neither was he. The city trembled below, sirens wailing, enemies closing in, and inside the penthouse, the real war was just beginning. To be continued. The city is alive with danger. Hearts are racing, choices are deadly, and Dominic Moretti's world isn't for the faint of heart. But Isabella? She's not running. She's standing tall, facing the storm, and proving that courage and love can ignite even in the darkest of nights. If you want to see how their story unfolds, if you want to follow every heartbeat, every secret, every twist in this dark, irresistible romance, then don't miss a moment. Subscribe now and step into the world of forbidden desire, power, and passion. The night is just beginning, and the storm has only just awakened. Your next obsession is waiting. Don't let it pass.